See you later. All right, regional Victorians are in countdown mode with harsh coronavirus restrictions due to ease as of midnight tonight. Melburnians are being warned they'll cop hefty new penalties under tough new border controls aimed at preventing travel into the state's regions. And of course, New South Wales has announced changes to permits for communities along the Victorian border. Joining me now is Leader of the Nationals in the Senate and Victorian Senator Bridget McKenzie. Senator McKenzie, always great to have you on the show. Well, this is good news. I mean, it's taken way too long, but at least there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. You know, we've talked about this before on your program, and you've done a great job of actually highlighting the human impact that these border closures are having right throughout our country over the last 2 months. But it's fantastic that the Premier in Danistan, Premier Daniel Andrews, can actually recognise that Mildura isn't Melbourne, that Wodonga isn't Werribee, and has finally decided to let COVID-free communities out in regional Victoria open up and get on with business. We've been paying a huge toll economically, socially, our health outcomes, etc., as families have to decide who gets to go to the funeral, putting off weddings. We've seen people putting off quite serious surgery and specialist appointments, etc. And our young people missing out on so much of their education through this period. It's been devastating. So to finally have some light at the end of the tunnel is fantastic. But this will be a test for Daniel Andrews. He failed on quarantine, he failed on contact tracing. Has he got it in him to make sure the ring of steel, as he likes to call it, around Melbourne will actually be watertight? Because at the moment, even as of yesterday, we had people rocking up from Melbourne in Wodonga, you know, visiting friends and wanting to get a haircut at the same time. I mean, it's just not on. So he needs to come true with his word and make sure that he does lock down those major arterials out of Melbourne into the regions.
Bridget, you and I have spoken about this on the program before, about the way in which the one-size-fits-all model that this fellow Andrews has implemented just hasn't worked, and it's been incredibly punitive. And we've seen so many examples of people unfairly treated in the regions and in the bush, particularly around border communities. What can we learn from this as we go forward? Because my opener tonight was very clear. I don't think in war or in pandemic the states should have anything to do with anything related to a crisis like this. I think it should be a Commonwealth jurisdiction. It should be coordinated by, from a medical and economic perspective, by the Commonwealth. But what can we learn as we go forward from the way in which they've mishandled this in Victoria?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic of discussion now to be having, that we're finally starting to see some easing of those restrictions. I think we actually have to recognise that 120 years ago we made a decision to come together as a nation and to get rid of internal borders for movement of people, movement of goods. I think we also need to get serious about a conversation about our federation and how we're actually going to go forward. I was at Andrew Liveris's National Press Club address today talking about how we need to have a national approach to a whole lot of things in this particular geopolitical environment that we're in. We can't have premiers making politically based decisions, as we're seeing not just in my home state of Victoria, but let's be frank, a few premiers decided to make city-centric decisions that had significantly negative impacts out on regional communities. And we've still got McGowan and Palaszczuk and indeed Tasmania holding out there and really not putting the national interest first. The reality is we are one country. We do produce goods out in the regions that need to get to ports, that need to be exported around the world for employment outcomes. And that doesn't happen if we have border closures. I think the other thing we need to realise is that with a pandemic such as this, we didn't know a lot at the beginning about how this virus would manifest itself, what the implications would be for us and our communities and our economies. The more we learnt, we should have been adapting our plans and our responses locally. You know, over the weekend we saw modelling out of Melbourne University, the actual profs who did that, saying that the Premier really needed to reconsider his response in light of that, as we've got more data and more information, and yet his refusal to really be flexible in the face of new information is not what's required in fighting a pandemic as virulent as this, with so many moving parts. To have sort of that, you know, an East German, shall we say, a set and forget policy setting for something as dynamic and complex as we've been dealing with over the last 3 months really isn't the type of leadership that we need at this point of time in the 21st century. And I hope on Friday there's a great opportunity for our national leaders to put the national interest first, get the Ag Code signed off, get a nationally consistent approach to quarantine and contact tracing so that we can start to open up with confidence.
Sure. Senator Bridget McKenzie, always great to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us tonight.
You too, Peter.